Hello, I'm Isaac Ostrom. Thanks for checking out another one of my videos. I'm a licensed tile contractor in Northern California, but I'm also a licensed General B contractor, which means I can do a full remodel in a house. So what we got going today is I want to show you how we do texture on small areas. If you're working in a bathroom, oftentimes you'll have an area that just needs a patch, or if you take out a wall, you need to patch the ceiling or smaller areas. So I don't do a whole lot of drywall, but if we have a small area, we will do it ourselves. So what we have here is this pony wall. This was a full wall here. This was a full wing wall all the way to the ceiling. So we already patched that, but into the remodel, the homeowner decided that they didn't want tile on the outside of the pony wall. So I'm gonna have to tape and texture this area here. And what we have here is Durox fiberglass matte gypsum. So I've never textured over it, but it says you can. So we'll see how it takes the texture and mud and everything. And then we have a small patch in the vanity area. We found out during the remodel that it's going to be a wall hung unit, so we're going to have to do some patching behind it. So we've made great progress. We've got our tile installed, we got our grout in, and everything is looking really nice. We've got our curbless entry shower. And this has come out really, really nice. We just have no curb going straight into the shower. And if you want to see how we did this, I have a video on how we floated this whole floor to get it like this. You'll also notice we also have our waterproofing that came out at least 12 inches past the threshold of the shower, which is required by TCNA. And I'll put up a little diagram for you so you can see that spec'd out in the TCNA handbook. But we have our banding coming all the way out to here. We have our Ardex 8+9 over it. So this whole area is waterproofed. 12 inches out, that's a requirement. Don't ever stop your waterproofing at the threshold or even 6 inches. They want a full 12 inches. So this is all sloping down into a nice Curdy-line linear drain. We got a really nice niche here, and we finished everything off with our wall caps. And so this is a floated wall, and I want to just show you how nice everything looks when we float the wall here. This is one of the reasons why we float the walls, is we get really nice flat surface and plumb. So when we measure up our shower door, everything's going to be really nice. It's going to measure up really nice. So I wish I was able to film a little more of the tile installation part, but it came out beautiful, and I'm going to show you how we get this texture going. So first thing I'm going to do is get the tape on. So I'm using actual drywall tape. I'm not using fiberglass mesh for this. You can use fiberglass mesh, and I'm not a drywaller. This is just the way that I've always learned how to do it. And in this video, I'm just showing you what I've learned over the years and how I do it. Again, I'm by no means an expert. You might want to look up another YouTube channel to check on everything I'm doing, but so far so good. Everything's worked and I get good results. But I use the tape, and leave a comment in the section below if you like tape or if you like the mesh tape, and please leave your reason why, just so we can all learn from it. So I'm going to go ahead. I have my 20-minute mud here. So I've mixed up my 20-minute mud. I use this 6-inch taping knife. Is probably the most important tool I have for doing drywall. I use it more than any other taping knife, and it's definitely just a must-have. So what we did here is I taped off the tile, because we have the edge of the tile right here. So I'm going to have to take this off. You can see the joint right here where the two boards meet up. I'm going to have to go over the screw holes too, and I'm going to have to put some tape in the corner. So when I do my tape, I just get some mud on the trowel, on the knife, and just get it in there. So my mud's probably a little bit loose, but it's gonna work. I always roll the tape out this way. I don't roll it this way. For one, the tape has a crease in it, so it'll want to pillow out if you do that. And for two, it's just a lot easier to get the tape in there. And I'm not pushing very much here. I'm just placing the tape on the edge. And then I'll use my knife to break it at a nice clean line like that. So I like to kind of just get my tape in there and let it soak up the water out of the mud a little bit before I push it down. So now I'm going to do this vertical edge, and again you can see where the seam of the two sheets of the wallboard are. And see, now my mud is firming up a little bit, so it's a little bit easier to work with. And drywall mud will come off anything pretty easily, so if you get it on your floor, it should come off really nice. And yeah, when you see a drywall at work, you'll see them, I mean, doing this, it looks real labor intensive. I mean, they would just go like this and it would be done, but again, I'm putting the tape rolling out this way. Move it back up. So with that, I'm not really pushing anything out yet. I'm just getting the tape in there. So now that this one's been sitting for a little bit, I'm gonna push out some of the mud. And I'm not pushing real hard with this. I'm putting some pressure on it, but I'm not trying to get all of the mud out. You need some mud under the tape still, so just getting it flat. The tape, it has this little crease in the middle so that you can crease it and get it into a corner. Okay, now I'm going to go over to this area. And so I got a couple patches here. Obviously I'm going to do my tape. Ooh, my mud is going off now. I gotta get going. Okay, so I got my tape in. You can use your knife if you want to knock off any. See, I got some stuff that was poking out, and instead of sanding stuff, I like to get it while it's still wet. Any little high spots you can take off. So I'm just going to go ahead and give another coat over my mud. So I'm actually kind of screening the mud off of the edge of the tile here. And when I do that move, I'm putting pressure on the knife right here, so that I don't create a line. If I were to push down, it would leave a line. If I were to push on this edge, so I'm pushing on the edge of the board right here, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I'm just trying to get it close. I'm not going for perfect right now because I'm going to do one more coat after this. This dent shield type material is a little harder to work with than if this was just regular paper drywall, because the surface is waterproof, so the mud doesn't stick to it as good. You'll notice this is a pretty heavy knockdown that we're trying to match. They have a lot of spray on this, so that's going to give me a little more room for air when I'm doing this. I don't have to get it as perfect because the texture is going to cover a lot of it. But one of the reasons I like paper tape is you can actually screed your trowel off a bit and it's going to cover. Because it's paper, it's like going over bare drywall. But if it were mesh tape and you screeded it tight against the wall, you would see all the little grids of the mesh. I just feel like you have to put more mud on with the mesh. But again, I see people doing it both ways. Probably one more coat and then we'll be ready to spray it. All right. Okay, so I have 2 coats on here. Everything's looking nice. I'm going to put one more little coat on here and we should be ready to texture. So you can see after I do, so I'm putting the pressure against the edge here, and then when I go back, I'm putting my pressure on the bottom of my trowel, so it doesn't leave a mark as I trowel it that way. Again, a lot of you might be using like a 10 or a 12-inch knife by now on this third coat, but I have a lot more control. Again, I'm just a beginner at this stuff, so I don't have that much control with the big knife. The smaller knives I can really manipulate and get a lot cleaner edge with them. So same thing with my screw holes. I'm putting the pressure on the outside of the blade. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to end up putting mud on the entire surface, because when I spray it and I knock it down, I don't want it to be drying at different rates. Okay, so we got our third coat of mud on here. It's looking really nice. One thing I like to do where we need to match to the old existing texture, you see we got a hard line on here where the mud was knifed on here. So we got this hard line. So I take a wet sponge, this is just a grout sponge, and I'll soften up this edge to where it blends in the old texture through the mud. So this is what I kind of want it to look like. You can see the old texture coming through the new mud. That's going to make it blend really nicely, as opposed to seeing a hard line under the texture. So this is a trick I like to do. And this 20-minute mud, I mean, it's firm, it's ready to go. You'll notice I didn't do any sanding here. No sanding at all. I hate sanding drywall, it's such a mess. Yeah, I'll just continue to blend it all in. And once I do that, the other thing this does, if you get a little bit of the mud on the old texture, it's actually good. It helps the mud bond to the old stuff, and it'll be a little more consistent when you knock it down. You can stop it for a second. So you can see where I feathered it in, and you can see how the white has overlapped over the old. This is actually going to provide a really nice place for the texture to bond to the old wall. One of the problems that you have when you do these patches is that, and I'll show you when I texture it, but what ends up happening is you'll spray it all, and then when you go to knock it down, because this is a knockdown texture where you drag a knife across it, it'll drag really nice because the mud is very porous and it'll suck the water out of the texture. But on a painted surface, especially with a semi-gloss paint, it doesn't. So it'll give you a nice knockdown, and then right when you hit the old area, the old painted area, it'll smear it and drag it. So you'll really see that come through. So if you wipe some of the texture onto the old surface, it helps with that. It helps draw some of the water out of the texture. And you can use your knife, like I said, instead of sanding, if there's any nice edges on there, I can knock it down instead of sanding. I can just knock any little imperfections out. Tighten up my corners a little bit. So yeah, you can see the old texture coming through the new. That's what I like to do there. So, all right, we should be ready for texture done. Go. Okay, so now we're getting ready to texture, and I want to talk about the tools we're going to use. You need a compressor. You need an air compressor. This is just a DeWalt air compressor, 165 psi, 6-gallon tank. You can do most bathrooms or a small room with something this size. If you're going to do whole rooms, bigger rooms, you don't want to use this setup. This setup is more for doing small patches, maybe a bathroom you could do. Otherwise, just hire a company to come in and do it, because they got the big equipment that they tow behind their truck. It's got a big compressor, a big hopper, and they can just go. But this is great for doing small rooms and patches. So I got my compressor. And then here's our drywall hopper. You can pick these up at Lowe's or Home Depot, and just call it a drywall hopper. So we got that. And then the texture I use, and then we got the texture, of course. So this is the pre-mixed, but you'll see when I mix it up that you need to add water to it. So we're gonna go ahead and mix it up and get ready to spray. Okay, so I got the hopper hooked up to the compressor. That's ready to go. One thing that's really important is how you regulate your air pressure with the compressor. So I know people do it a lot of different ways. Again, this is just my way of doing it. Somebody might have a better way. Leave your comment in the section below. Tell me if you think you have a better way so we can all learn. But you'll see we have two gauges here. One is the tank pressure. So we're sitting at about 165 psi. I got tank pressures all the way filled up. Then you have the dial here that controls the regulated pressure. Now that's the amount of air that's coming out of the hose. So the tank's pressurized, and then you got a regulator. And I like to keep it at about 40. And that's it. Again, it can vary with the different textures, but that's a good rule of thumb if you're doing a simple knockdown. 40 psi is pretty low. Again, I know if you're going to do like so basically the bigger splatter, you want lower psi. The finer spatter, like an orange peel texture or a real fine knockdown, you want higher psi. And I know some guys that run it all the way up at 120 psi when they're doing like an orange peel. But for this texture, this knockdown, we're going to go with 40 psi. And so we also have a gauge here that controls the amount of air coming in. I have that turned up, so there's the air coming out. And so I usually just rest my hopper like that on the hose. That's just a good way to be able to dump it in there. And so I'm going to take my head, and you can see this, usually when these come right out of the box, when you get a new one, it's going to be really thick. It's usually way too thick to do a knockdown texture. So you usually have to mix water into it. Now I'm down to about 1/4 of the bucket. So we've already pre-mixed it enough times and put the extra back in. So we have a nice loose consistency, and this might be a little thick, but I'm going to try it first. Again, we have a real heavy knockdown that we're trying to match. It's got it stands up, it's built up, so I think we're going to have to use some pretty thick mud. But for a standard knockdown texture, I want a texture of like a thick paint, like that loose. Like you definitely don't want it like a stiff drywall mud. But we're gonna try with this one first and see how it goes. Hopefully it's right, because it's really hard to scrape the texture off. But I can take a piece of paper, I'll spray it on the ground and see if I like it. So I'm just gonna pour my mud into the hopper. That should be enough. Again, you can always, if you got too much in the hopper, you can spray it back into the bucket when you're done. So we should be all ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and set up the camera over here so you can watch me do this. Okay, so I got it sprayed. You saw how I did that. And I said 12 to 16 inches. I was probably more like at least 2 feet away. Play with it. Sometimes you gotta be a little closer. Sometimes you gotta be a little farther back. But for this one, I was probably at least 2 feet away when I was spraying it. So I got it covered. Sprayed real nice. So again, depending on temperature and humidity, you wanna wait about, I say, between like 10 and 20 minutes before you knock this down. You want it to start to firm up a little bit. That way it doesn't smear. So we got a good spray on here. Yeah, I think this one's gonna turn out pretty nice, but I'm gonna use my 6-inch taping knife to knock this down. Big areas, they have these big knockdown blades that they use, but you'll notice I did this whole thing with nothing but a 6-inch taping knife. So I like it because especially when you're doing patches, you might have dips and humps in your wall, and the 6-inch knife will contour a lot better. You'll get a little bit more consistent. Obviously you don't want to do a large area with it, but for small areas, the 6-inch knife works really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to work one direction, and I'm going to work from the tile away, and we'll see how that comes out. So I'm just putting really light pressure on here, not putting much pressure at all. So I can go that way, then I can go this way. So I'm just literally just dragging my knife. I'm not pushing down at all. If you push down too much, you'll get too big of splotches. If you don't push down enough, the splotches will stay too tight. So this is just really gentle pressure. And then I use a sponge just to keep my knife clean. And for sure, I have, it's definitely set up more on the drywall mud than it is in the more gray areas of the wallboard, because that wallboard is waterproof. So I'm kind of going back over and trying to feather in a little bit the two surfaces. John, you want to try to get a close up of this? Maybe even like right up here. You got it? Is it showing close? Okay. So this texture came out really nice. I would say if I could do it all over again, I probably would use stiffer mud, because you see this old texture, you hardly ever see a texture that's built out this heavy, and you could just tell how dry the mud was when they did it. But this is it's a really nice texture for a patch, and I always tell my customers when we're patching stuff in the house, I always tell them it's a patch. If you really look at it, you're gonna see it, but you just want it to blend. The only way to make it perfect is if you were to redo all of the texture in the room, which sometimes we have to do. Sometimes it's not worth it to try to patch. Sometimes we'll just tear all the drywall out and start new, or we'll skim it. A lot of times in our bathrooms, we take all of the drywall off of the walls, and then new drywall, tape it, and then the ceilings, most of the time we don't replace our ceilings. We'll just do a skim coat over it, and then we'll texture it. Because if you're taking a ceiling out, you're dealing with insulation and all kinds of stuff, and you don't usually need to do that. But for patches, this works great. So I'm going to try to feather in where the new meets the old. And it's working pretty good. Like I said, it's real easy to, when you're matching up against old paint, it's easy to drag it and cause big smears instead of the little texture spots. But that's a real nice match. I really like that. That blended really nice. So I'll finish up this area, and this was just behind the vanity. So this is going to be a wall hung vanity, so the only part that's going to be seen is from here down, and it won't be seen very much. So I'm not going to be as careful, but it still came out nice. So there you go. I hope you learned something from this, but texturing is a big part of bathroom remodeling. Usually every remodel you do, you have to get into some sort of texturing. So when I first learned how to do this, I was really excited to be able to do it. So I'm not a drywall specialist by any means, but I will definitely get by doing patches. And I can, if I spend enough time with it, I can get it really good. So I hope this video helps you do the same. So watch that next video coming up, and I would say I love you and I love being your tile coach, but this isn't really a tile video, so I still love you guys, and watch the next video, and we'll see you on the next one.